Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another session of Gather to Grow here on Twitter Spaces with Food from Mzansi. I am your host, Donumdu, talking about all things farming. And I'm absolutely excited about tonight's session because I think I've been obsessed with snails since I was very young. It's so exciting to be able to talk about it even in my work now in the agricultural space. I'm very happy to have my guest with me. Michael, I'm going to start with you. You're from Gosh and Snail Farm.
Gosh and Snail Farm is the farming side of it, and then Garden Route Foods is the processing side and the actual route to market. It all started for us about 4 years ago. We did about a year of research and got into the whole industry and the possibility of starting it up in South Africa. That's all where it started, as a family.
That's so awesome. And I'm going to pick your brain throughout the session because I think it's so interesting, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. And then I also have Rory Skultz. He is from Wolfish Farm. Rory, just a bit about yourself, where you started in the industry and what got you into the space.
To be honest, I can't even tell you when I first got interested in snail farming, but it was a couple of years back. Then I happened upon Gosh and Snail Farm, who were actually offering a course on snail farming. So I attended that. I think it was 2018, 2019. Maybe Michael can confirm that. So I attended their first course, then started farming thereafter. I've basically had snails now for 2 years. I'm in my second year or second season. We learn as we go.
Thanks so much for joining me, Rory, and it's so great to have you with me in the space. Now, let's kick off maybe with an overview of the snail farming industry in Mzansi. Michael, you're from Gosh and Snail Farm. Maybe you can set the scene for us because you actually say that there's been a market for snails for the past 45 years. But why is it that we're not exploring it as agriculturalists?
Yeah, so the 45 years we get from basically some of the oldest menus we found date back 45 years ago, and there's escargots on the menu. So the main problem came in with closing the loop. So you had different sectors of the industry operating separately from each other. So you had the agricultural side sort of like still learning and trying their best to get a sort of industry up and running. Without a processing factory, that was very difficult. Then you also had companies basically importing end products and selling that off to the market. So you needed someone to come in and basically close the loop and join the two. And we've come to a point now with the likes of Rory and farmers doing basically what Rory's done is climbed in a couple of years ago, done a lot of learning, sacrifices along the way, getting to a point now where we can quite comfortably start producing snails and canning it. The first locally canned snail, which I'm aware of, happened about 2 years ago. So we canned our very first end products, call it 2 years ago. I'm not 100% sure about the dates. First time was ever done, yeah, even though there'd been snails traded in this country for many years.
Thank you so much for this. Now, before starting any farming enterprise, doing your research and securing a market is key. What did you do before you started your snail farming business? Because in the article that you're featured in on Food from Mzansi, talking about the specific commodity, you said that it's not just a copy and paste venture. What did you have to do? And you also mentioned in your introductions that you spent a year researching about snail farming.
Yes, I mean, even Rory can second me on this, is that the difference between our farm and Rory's farming is not a copy-paste. Rory's in the Eastern Cape and we're in the Western Cape, and he's got differences to us, and different things work for him as what it does for us. So the research we did involved quite a bit of traveling, agricultural traveling that we needed to do to gain information agriculturally, as well as the processing side of it, for us to really understand what's needed and how to process a snail. You can grow a snail pretty well, but then if you don't know how to process it, you're going to struggle to close the loop. So we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. We did copy-paste. We actually flown farmers down from Greece. We had flown farmers down from Poland. And we realized that we needed to take a little bit from everyone and implement it into our own agricultural culture, yeah, and see what works for us and change along as we go. We did a lot of traveling. My father-in-law did the most of the traveling. He actually went to Ireland, saw farms in Ireland, England. He went to Cyprus recently again. And then locally in South Africa, there were actually quite a bit of farmers involved, small scale, throughout South Africa. We all had to sort of share knowledge gained and then move on forward.
I think that's definitely an important aspect and it can never be overlooked. Rory, what has your experience been like? Michael talking about it being very different from the way he does things to how you farm. Maybe just your take on starting out for anyone who's interested in getting into this possible avenue or even something that they can do alongside other commodities.
It's definitely a learning curve, and I would say that there isn't an easy way out. You can't just buy a book and follow it word for word and have success first time round. Entirely possible you will, but I think more likely that you won't. Let's say the simple side of it, snail farming is quite easy. I think most people who are farming snails that I know of don't necessarily come from a farming background, but yet it is still possible. The industry is still very young, and I feel that as let's say, a snail farming nation, we haven't yet got the depth to it. There's no snail farming guru that knows absolutely every answer to every question that you might come up with. So a lot of the time you are having to do the research or pay the school fees yourself. My advice to anyone interested would be to be quite realistic with their expectations. The market is there, the market is growing. There's now, thanks to people like Goshen and Garden Root Foods, there is a relatively easy outlet for your product, where prior you might have had to rely solely on small-scale sales at markets or restaurants, that sort of stuff. Now there's a bulk buyer available. So that is basically why I decided to take the plunge. But be realistic. Don't believe every pipe dream that people might try to sell you. It does take a lot of hard work, and I'm sure anyone that has said it, there's no such thing as quick money.
Definitely. How much space do you need if you're considering farming with snails? This is all new to me. If you could just guide us through the process of setting it up. Does it happen indoors? Is it something that can happen outdoors? And then is it a seasonal thing? How does it work exactly, Michael?
We believe in South Africa, with the sort of climate we have, it's very possible to do it throughout the year. Europe only does it in summer. There are regions in South Africa where you're probably going to get a lot more slower growth rates because of the weather. But we believe it's quite possible throughout the year. The setting up of the farm size-wise, there's so much information about indoor methods and open farming or outdoor farming. It's just that we've realized with each one comes its own risks. To be honest, we haven't really seen an indoor complete farm that works well. Hopefully someone proves us wrong soon, but we consider it the most success from outdoor farming, where you have to have a net up to keep your predators such as birds away from the snails. Your space, it's all relative to what you sort of want to achieve, I guess. We started with a third of a hectare's farm. So we had 3,200 squares, and our goal is to achieve 16 tons of snails per cycle from that size tunnel. The prices vary from region to region. We were in the region of about 550,000 Rand to get the whole project up and running, the farming aspect of it.
Thanks for that. Rory, did you work on the same method? Also, when you started, what was your goal in terms of starting out? Did you immediately want to obviously go through Michael to process with their facility, or what was your take?
As I mentioned, I attended the training course at Goshen Snail Farm, and then the intention was to farm snails to supply their processing plant. And to this day, the only snails that I've sold is to them. I initially had ideas to set up something probably similar in size to Goshen's farm, and then that was early 2020, I think. Then COVID kicked in, and I took a bit of a step back and took a slightly more skeptical approach. And I set up a very small outdoor but different farming style curtain method as a bit of a pilot project. And I learned a lot through that, mainly in how much I underestimated how much labor is involved. Thinking that I could handle it on my own sort of part-time was a big mistake. So in terms of learning, it was a good exercise. In terms of producing anything saleable, it was an absolute disaster. My second season, I've gone for what I refer to as flat farming, which is the same method Goshen use, and it's markedly easier to manage, and I think it's just got a lot going for it in the way of farming.
Thanks, Rory. Let's talk about breeds. What are the breeds available, and what are they used for specifically? To the snails we eat, is that the same ones that are used for cosmetics? Is it the same breed? Maybe you could just give us some clarity on that, Michael.
When we first started researching the breeds and what's out in the market, we were very surprised. It was a lot more than what we thought. We're focusing on, at Garden Root Foods, is a snail that grows what we feel the quickest to the size we need it to be. We farm with the Helix aspersa maxima, and it's the same species we would use to further products in the cosmetics range. For instance, the only cosmetics range I know of at the moment, large scale, is Saltone. They just use a snail slime or mucus. They don't specify exactly which breed it is. As to my understanding, it's all the same breed, the Helix aspersa.
Thanks, Michael. What do you feed them? And also, what are some of the costs involved in setting up? I think, Michael, you spoke about how much it cost you in terms of your entire setup, but maybe you can just break it down for us. If I have access to some land, or if I want to put some land available to do this, what should my costing be for this specific commodity?
It's quite a lengthy answer to get very accurate to what's needed. But basically, the basic overview is you'll need a breeding room facility where it's closed off and you control the microclimates. That generates eggs. Those eggs then morph into small snails, baby snails. You then put those baby snails into your growing tunnel or your fattening tunnel. And then that's where you would put them on green feed first. And then they would slowly but surely work their way onto the dry feed, which is a powdered feed that we every couple of months there's improved feeds that are out and there's new feeds, and we've got people as we speak right now working on different formulas, actually with the one professors from Stellenbosch helping us with feeds. So they would go on to a dry feed, and then that dry feed would put them through to their harvestable size. Pricing wise, one of these speakers would have been Ange. She has put up containers to breed in, and there's guys that are breeding in garages. We built our own breeding room. So it all depends on what you got and what you want to build. Building costs vary all over the country. I think our building cost was about 50,000 Rand for the breeding room. And then the total cost for the netting was about 320, if I'm not mistaken. And then all the extras come along with that. To build breeding tables, you need to build wooden boards. That's sort of like similar to a pallet. Stand outside in your growing tunnel. And all that adds up. You get to your grand total of probably, in most cases, from about a third of a hectare and bigger, would cost you in the region of between 500 and 700,000 Rand.
Thank you so much for that breakdown, Michael. Rory, maybe just your take. I think you spoke about it being sort of more labor intensive than you thought it would be. What goes into keeping them healthy or alive? I'm sort of navigating on ground that I haven't really worked on. Usually I have like specific questions that I ask, but when it comes to specific commodities, but I don't know anything about snails. So how does it work when you have to work with the snails? What must you do? What must you be aware of? And what is the labor that's actually involved in caring for them and making sure that they grow?
So Michael mentioned the cycle starts with a breeding room. In that breeding room, depending on the size scale of your farm, you will have a number of breeding tables, which you populate with your breeding stock, which depending on the size of your table can be, I think my tables are about 2,500 snails per table. That is a calculated number which then gives you your end amount of snails that you will populate your grow out area to ultimately give you your harvest yield. The season starts with your breeding rooms where you are caring for them. Obviously, like any farming practice, cleanliness, hygiene is very important. The whole purpose of the breeding room is to create eggs. So there is a process in which the snails lay eggs into soil containers, and those eggs get moved from that into little incubation containers. So that can be quite labor intensive. If you picture a couple thousand snails laying clusters of eggs every day, which you must very delicately move into a different environment, it's quite labor intensive. It takes a lot of time. And I've spent many a night into the early hours of the morning fiddling with a brush and a teaspoon, moving snail eggs. From there on, it does slow down a bit, gets a bit easier once the snails are in the net house, and then it's general maintenance. My staff spend most of their life pulling out weeds because I, at this stage, refuse to use any sort of herbicide. I like the more natural approach to things, but that obviously is something my staff might feel differently about. As I said, I started off thinking I could handle snail farming part-time on my own. I now employ 2 full-time staff to manage my snail grow out. And as that grows, I imagine so will the staff count. I'm not sure if that answered everything you had asked.
Definitely. I think that gives me a better idea of what goes into it. I actually laughed when you mentioned the spoon and, moving eggs because, it reminded me of myself with my fish as well. Maybe just more clarity on, I didn't know, for example, that snails hibernate. So do forgive my ignorance. But what happens during that time? Maybe you can just explain that part to us, Michael.
There's hibernation and there's estivation. So when we want to create a breeding snail, it needs to go through a very lengthy hibernation. Trying to get snails to hibernate safely, successfully, is pretty difficult. You have to convince them to basically prepare for a deep hibernation for a long period of time so that their bodies can sustain it. That gets done by lowering the temperature for many days. We accidentally hibernated snails for 8 months. They did survive. A lot of them did survive. And then you get estivation, which we use when we actually harvest the snails. So estivation is basically by removing the water and food, snails will sleep in hot weather at low humidity. That's when you can then package them and transport them. When it comes to hibernation, it's a process of sleeping. Hibernating, they can sleep for very long. Estivation, they can not sleep for very long. If you need to get them from estivation into hibernation, it's all about the temperature and humidity. Like I said, it's not easy to get them to do exactly what you want them to do and also to prepare their bodies to survive the lengthy hibernation.
Thanks, Michael. Let's talk about some of the challenges or some of the threats involved in producing snails. Birds, for example, being a threat as well. Maybe you could just give us some other challenges that you've encountered.
Yes, sure. So rats are a large threat. And then very recently, I think it was last year, the whole country's snail population took a massive knock in regards to the likes of trematodes and nematodes. So there is a bacterial and fungal threat as well. With time and experience, we actually develop new ways of combating this. So as we've carried on with snail farming, there's products coming up that help us disinfect what we need to disinfect. There's products coming up which we're adding probiotics to feed and to the sprinkler systems. So that all improves as we go along. Weather plays a big role as well. The snail's defense mechanism is to sleep, basically, and not move if they are uncomfortable. So if your snails are small enough and they are uncomfortable enough, they will actually estivate. They could sleep long enough to starve. So quite a bit of threats and new threats coming up as we farm, which we weren't aware of. And so we learn. That's why Rory actually said it earlier, is there's no real snail guru. We all learn together. As we go along, we fix problems that we come up with.
Thanks, Michael. Maybe, Rory, if you can maybe also just share your take on some of the challenges that you've had on your farm, because I think we mentioned way in the beginning when we started, it's not just the copy and paste job. So Michael's experience might be different to yours. Maybe just some of the challenges that you faced.
Snails are incredibly good at escaping and incredibly clever at killing themselves. They also are, I think, probably bottom of the food chain. So anything slightly bigger than it wants to eat them. So as Michael mentioned, rats. I've found shrews in my net house. Moles also have snail on the menu. So really pretty much anything wants to eat a snail. You actually spend a lot of time and effort guarding against that, putting in rodent barriers, mole barriers, all that sort of stuff. I've experimented with different rodent traps. It's ongoing. And I think, as Michael says, different parts of the country will suffer from different problems. And I don't think there's necessarily a one-fits-all sort of approach to stuff. Another thing that I've had challenges with is weather. So where my grow out is in particularly heavy rain, it does flood in certain sections of it. So I've been in there at 10 o'clock at night scooping snails out of puddles. There's always something that you realize that you can improve. It is very much a learning sort of curve that one has to go through. Until you're actually doing it, you don't realize how much there is to know. So you go on a course, you feel it's quite simple and feel that you'll have a pretty good handle on it, but the learning never ends. And I think probably 10 seasons down the road, we'll still be learning new things and better ways of doing it. Looking forward to the next 10 seasons.
Definitely. It makes it so exciting to be able to do it, right? So you're in this new space and you're going and you're learning. It excites me. We have two of our listeners who wants to ask questions. Just Xavier, I'm going to give you a chance to ask your question, contribute, comment on tonight's topic. Floor is yours.
Guys, thank you so much for this. It's something I've been very interested in, and it's great to hear from actual farmers instead of the internet. I've got a few questions, but I'm going to just stick with two. Viability in terms of, how much you're selling it per kilo, just an estimate or something. And also, how long does it take to mature from the time you've bred the snails to the time you can actually sell the snails? That's it for me.
Thanks so much. Michael, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So viability of it's very connected to economy of scale. So in the long run, we're trying to, as a factory, we're trying to pay the farmer as much as possible in order to keep a supply and growth. We need the industry to grow, we need supply to grow. So if you have unhappy farmers, that's not going to happen. At the moment, it sits at 55 Rand a kg for raw snails. The thing with the snails is as a factory, we are focusing on getting it canned. Now, that is about 33% of the snail being used. We now need to develop the markets further than that for us to really get the full worth out of the snail. We're working on high protein and high calcium foodstuffs. We're working on the snail mucus and cosmetics. There's pharmaceutical and cosmetics involved there. So the value chain is rather large, but we have very little to work with right now. As a farmer, it's on paper, it's almost too good to be true. As Rory says, in reality, it's a learning curve. It's quite possible that you do it the first time and you aim for 10 ton and you get your 10 ton. I think it's going to be very lucrative to someone who sticks it out and pushes through to the end. Basically, you can use the least amount of labor and effort to yield the most amount of snails. It'll work very well. The margins are good if you're doing it right and you've gone through your learning curve. You'll use a lot less effort to achieve the sort of margins that you would with a lot of other agriculture, giving a lot more effort into the production of your farm. Timing wise, best case scenario, you're probably looking at 6 months per cycle. I think it's closer to between 6 and 8 months. My father-in-law likes to say if you can get 3 cycles out of 2 years, you're doing well for a start. But we believe firmly that if your timing is correct, learn what sort of seasons you do what. Meaning, are you going to put your babies in the tunnel in the start of summer, or are you going to put your babies in the tunnel at the end of winter, if you get what I'm saying? If you can get 3 cycles out of 2 years, you're doing well.
Thanks, Michael. I hope that answers your question, Xavier. And I see you have your hand up again. You can take the floor.
Just 2 more questions. Appreciate those answers. It puts a bit more light on it. Packaging. Michael, you say you guys are working from the factory. Does that mean that a farmer is bringing the snails raw, or is that frozen? How would they package it? Also, export, is that something that's open in the market yet or not?
Because it's still so new, we're working on a lot of different aspects of it. I've received frozen, I've received live snails. We prefer about 90% of the choice would be live hibernated snails. So if you're traveling very far, you'll need to send them in cold storage and they will need to be hibernated. If you are going to do an overnight trip or a couple hours, then we don't need them really to be in cold storage. So we would then receive them from you, most likely packed. We suggest packing them in 5 kg bags in plastic crates, no more than about 3 to 4 bags per crate. And we would then receive them like that, weigh them, and we actually do total bacteria count testing on the products, on your products for E. coli, salmonella, the basic food safety tests. And we got a lab at the factory. So packaging wise, it's crates. What makes it difficult is the crates are quite expensive in the beginning. But once we are up and running continuously for a couple of years, we would have company crates that basically make the rounds from successful farmers to factories like all the major agricultural sectors do. The second question you had, export market, we as a factory, we focused on saturating the local need first. We thought we got a market here, we got products in every major retailer. Let's saturate, instead of importing product, let's produce our own. And then the more and more we started delving into the possibility of exporting it, the more and more doors started opening. I'm actually going to have a presentation with possible Chinese clients in the Eastern Cape. So sending off product into China. And there's actually a food expo in Shanghai that we will have our product at very soon. So we've got a couple countries in Africa that is quite large in the snail industry, which we'd love to export to. So there is definitely a channel for exports. But as a strategy, we wanted to first saturate locally and then basically overflow into the exports. That's the strategy. Whether it does that or not remains to be learned.
Thanks, Michael. And just Xavier, I hope that you're getting as much from the space as I am and the rest of our listeners. Duncan Masiwa, editor of Food for Mzansi, the floor is yours. What's your question, your comment?
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy that just Xavier asked 2 of the questions that I wanted to ask. So it means I get to ask the other 2 questions that I have. It's one of those industries that are still untapped in South Africa. And maybe the speakers can maybe just paint a picture in terms of what does the snail farming subsector currently look like in South Africa? What are the current challenges in terms of access to markets, funding, and especially development? So that's the first question. And the other one is compared to international players, how are we faring as a snail farming industry here in South Africa compared to guys that are doing it in other countries?
Thanks, Duncan. Michael, do you want to take this one?
Thanks, Duncan. So comparing us to other countries, for instance, we went to a snail processing factory in Turkey. And if I'm not mistaken, their tons that they were doing a year was 3,200 tons a year. So it's huge. Coming back to your first question, how we are doing at the moment is we've teamed up with partners in the factory, which branches off into the agricultural sector of it as well. Guys, one of the listeners here is Anton van Sail, and he's part of that group. We've partnered up with farmers in the factory And those farmers, along with us, are basically trying to grow the first chain of supply to such an extent that we can comfortably take on large clients. The likes of Anton, he's got a large farm and he's busy growing as we speak. I was on a farm today in Jeffreys Bay that also is growing and they're doing very well. It looks good so far. We're looking at probably close to 400 tons next year as a factory. And when I say first line of supply, it would be those partners we set up. So we're looking at about 400 tons just from our first line of supply. We're hoping the second line of supply would be guys contracted to the factory, but not actual partners in the factory. Also 400 tons. Then we're looking quite comfortable at 800 tons a year. It's a far stretch, but we're hoping that's where we get to or get close to. Internationally, we are way off of what the guys do internationally. Like I said, that factory processes about 3,000 tons a year compared to our goals, our short-term goals, or the next 24-month goal of 800 tons.
Thanks, Michael. Rory, maybe your comments on this, also as a farmer in the industry. I was really hoping to get Ange into the space because I wanted a woman also to say, hey, I'm a woman, I'm doing snails. She's a bit shy. She didn't want to join us just yet. But hopefully when we have this discussion again, she can join us. Rory, just your take and comments as well. And then I'm going to go back to Xavier as well.
Well, my take is South Africa on an international scale is very new. I mean, we're babies in the industry, so we can't really be competitive just yet. But I think we are a farming nation and we're in a good position to do well at it. We have good climate, and like Europe, we are likely to be able to farm all year round. We can become a pretty decent snail farming nation. In comparison to some of the other farmers that are setting up, I am a baby. I have quite a small-scale farm in comparison. But as things grow, I hope to develop as well. There's a lot of interest being shown in it, and just by, if you follow any sort of social media with regards to snail groups and stuff, a lot of people are interested. I think probably the serious farmers are not necessarily on the groups. I mean, I've seen people claiming to be a snail farmer who farm like on their kitchen table because they have a whole 6 snails or something. So you take it as from where it comes. But I do think it is growing, and I think the more people that get involved, the more the industry will mature, the more knowledge will be available and support, and I think become a bit more easier to get things done without having to learn the hard way.
Thanks, Rory. Just Xavier, you have another question or comment?
Okay, I got 3 questions. I think this is for Michael with the factory. What do you guys do with the snail shells at the moment? And then the next question, I think Rory touched on it slightly with the 6 snails on the kitchen table. I wanted to know, how would one start this at home? I don't want to go pick the snails from the garden and start farming them, thinking I'm a farmer. And then last question is there anyone doing farm to table in terms of cuisine on snails? Or is that a bit far-fetched at the moment? And then I got 2 more questions.
Thanks, Xavier. Michael, your responses on this one?
Yes, so if I remember correctly, so let me just get the first one on my mind was the farm to table. We've got a couple of chefs that have ordered different versions of snails. So, we can it or pouch it. So we hermetically seal it. It's got a 5-year shelf life. The product we send to get canned is basically call it a slaughtered snail, a processed snail. We've got chefs purchasing 1 cooked slaughtered snails, and then we've got chefs purchasing full bags of frozen snails. They, or even live snails, they then would go through a process of cleaning and preparing the snails as per they were taught in chef school, I guess, doing French cuisine. Food to table, harvesting out the wild. I don't know of anyone doing that. I have seen videos of it. I think the most popular was Gordon Ramsay did it with snails out his garden. Do you know there is a South African farming snails that puts it in a jar and sells it, and they do pretty well. Looks like a good product. I unfortunately haven't tasted it myself. That answers the food to table. What's the next one?
What do you guys do with it at the factory at the moment?
Yes. So we do nothing at the moment with it, apart from we actually have given a lot of the leftover shells and meat to pig farmers, for instance, the offcuts and so on. What we did is we actually went and crushed shells and got the breakdown of what the makeup of a shell is. And we were very surprised as to the high percentage of calcium. So there's a couple things we can use it for. Can actually, one of the most sold units in Turkey, for instance, was a snail that's been cooked, so that's been put back in the shell, and it's been filled with flavored butter, so garlic butter with spices and herbs. And what you would do is you would then just heat it up and eat it, exactly as what you would in the restaurants in France or your high-end restaurants where you get served snails in the shell. So that's one of the uses we've got for it. We've got a fish farmer that's buying shells from us for his fishes. That's all still part of the R&D regarding the extra products we want to develop. We've come a long way with it, but it's still a way off to get it onto the market.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to give Duncan an opportunity to ask his question, and then I'll go back to Xavier. I think Xavier is very much into tonight's topic. Thank you so much for being here. Duncan, the floor is yours.
I love it. I can hear that Xavier definitely needs the information, dude, which is great. But maybe just going back to my question about challenges in terms of access to markets, funding and development. Is it an organized subsector? Is there some sort of body that represents snail farmers in the country? And what kind of support are you guys getting from a Department of Agriculture perspective?
In the beginning, we sort of did get started in different groups and played around with the feeling of getting a body involved. But I think it was too early. We sort of had to retract out of it, only because it's so new and there's so many different points of views. I mean, if the two of us are in a group together, Duncan, and you believe X is the route to success, and I believe Y is the route to success, and I believe X is going to be a complete failure, it sort of like clashes against each other when it's so new. There's no real body that actually has the experience yet to take over the complete running of this and say, this is the way to go. What we've done is the factory sort of like leads the quality control and sets the standard to what is needed in order to secure a good quality end product. So body-wise, I think it's basically just the factory at the moment that sort of controls the standard. There will be space for a body, as you say, to take charge and to be the driving force behind standards and procedures. Department of Agriculture, we've done a bit of chatting to different departments, different provinces, but I think it's still so new, no one has really got involved majorly. Support-wise, we haven't looked for much support. So we basically get a lot of support regarding the standards of importing and exporting and talking to the Department of Forestry and Fisheries regarding the standards like that. Otherwise, agricultural-wise, not yet, but it'll come.
Thanks, Michael. Xavier, you had 3 more questions, I think, before we wrap up.
So coming back to the, trying to start this thing at home as a pet project or something, are there kits available from you guys or where would you get like the proper stuff as opposed to picking out of the garden?
What we do as an industry at the moment is we sort of juggle supply of snails in order to create breeders. So it's about a 4-month process to do that. We lost a lot of snails learning how to do it. So as a factory, we would like to get to a point where we have a good local supply of breeding snails. At the moment, we're importing snails out of different parts of the world. We did quite a bit of importing out of Ukraine, and that drew to a sudden halt. We're now doing a lot of importing out of Greece. It's very expensive, very tricky. It's ups and downs the whole time. Transport was an issue. Clearing was an issue. We actually imported once through COVID by ship, and we had about 2.8 tons of snails that died en route. Rory actually was there the day when we collected the snails. We opened the container in PE Harbour, and they phoned us from Jeffreys Bay to complain about the smell. It's a learning curve. Getting started, there's a lot of kits available. Goshen as a farm does supply the kits and course. I would suggest start there. If you've got a farm near to you, go visit the farm, speak to someone doing it now and what they've learned. Goshen does sort of provide a lot of aid like that. We believe growing the farmers in the beginning is very important and basically supplying on-hands assistance as far as we can. It becomes difficult when you're trying to juggle quite a bit because as a factory, we also have to ensure the end product is good and the market is healthy, meaning we farm, we process, we package, and we sell. So the whole chain needs to be looked after. But like I said, with partnering up with different teams, we're really starting to divide the responsibilities. Yeah, it's going well so far.
Thanks, Michael. And I'm really sorry that you had that horrible experience with all of your snails dying. Rory, I maybe want to just get your take on specifically, obviously you send your snails to Goshen, but what are some of the other markets that you've explored? Have you done anything else? Maybe some advice to the newbies in the space?
My core idea was to farm only to supply Goshen. I didn't necessarily want to be spending my weekends trying to sell snail for snail at flea markets. I have recently started exploring the idea of maybe supplying some fresh snails to 1 or 2 key restaurants in my area. But otherwise, my main business is still to supply garden root foods. Advice to anyone wanting to start. Obviously, you can grow or build anything, but if you can't sell it, it's not a business. Make sure that before you jump in and spend a lot of money, that your outlet is there and ready to buy.
Thanks, Rory. Xavier, I feel like I'm co-hosting the session with you tonight. You can take the floor.
Last question. So, Michael and Rory, these are strictly land snails, your garden type variety. It's nothing like the aquatic snails in the fish hobby, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. I hope that answers your question. We have run out of time, and I know that these two farmers are super busy, so I'm not going to take more of their time than I need to. But maybe just last comments. We didn't really touch on, the processing in terms of cosmetics, but I think we briefly spoke about that. And I think maybe in a few months' time, we can invite you guys back and maybe get Ange also to speak on it as someone who's also establishing himself. And then maybe invite a few other farmers as well into the space to talk about it again. Xavier, hopefully you'll be established by that time. I'm not sure what your plans are, but maybe you can also join us again. And maybe just last and final comments. Start with you, Rory, and then give the last word to Michael.
My final comment is I think it is a good industry with a lot of promise, but it is still a young industry and there's lots to be learned as a country, as well as individuals. So stick at it, as Michael says, and I feel that it will pay off in the long run.
Thanks, Rory. Michael, just your final comments and also maybe more details about how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in your starter pack, but also just knowing more about how they can get into it.
Getting into it is easy. You can contact us. All our details on Facebook. The factory's in Mossel Bay and the farm's in Wilderness. We got farms popping up all over the country. So to start off, I would suggest everyone goes and actually sees a farm. It's always good to really see it, smell it, touch it. So it's like Rory says, there's sometimes it seems like a massive pie in the sky and it's too good to be true. But once you understand the ins and outs of it, and the more you go through it, it'll get better. My final thoughts on today is thanks a lot for the invite to your Twitter space. It was very interesting. This is my first time I'm actually talking on Twitter. I actually downloaded Twitter for the first time because of this invite. I'll be following everyone and stick to it. Very interesting, and thank you, Dawn, for everything you do for agriculture, actually. I really like what you do, and I'll be listening on in further agricultural talks you do. For snails, yeah, anyone's welcome. Anytime you around, pop into the factory or pop into the farm, and I hope everyone starts to eat snails. We need people to buy snails off the shelf and start eating it once a week.
Yeah, that's actually true. I should probably have asked, what it tastes like, because I myself haven't tasted it, but I'll definitely try and get some. I think you're close enough to me for me to be able to order. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Rory. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both with me. Thank you so much, Xavier, for all your contributions and questions, and Duncan, who's also left. So thank you so much for allowing me to create the space and this platform for us all to gather and grow. Have a lovely evening, and bye-bye.